And we do have some more chairs coming for our public gallery. Councillors, please take your seats. We are organising seats for the... Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, ki whangarei takiwā, hui, 27 May 2021. A very warm welcome to all of our councillors, members of the public gallery and our staff. I'm going to ask Councillor Connaught to open our meeting with a karakia.
Tui e runga, tui e raro, tui e me nākau, kia patuhi tahi, kia kimihia, kia rātua, te maramatanga, te mohiranga, te hi wā maurua. Find all that is above before us, find all that is below after us. Find our collective hearts that they may beat in unison, as we search out, as we seek after enlightenment and clarity, and seize the breath of life.
As a reminder, as always, that if there are any items on the agenda to which you have an interest, please make sure that you declare that interest at the beginning of the item. We have two apologies today. Apologies from Councillors Golightly and Martin. Councillor Poplar is moving. Councillor Reid is seconding. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against, carried. Just a housekeeping matter, I will be taking item 6.4, which was our supplementary agenda item. I will be taking that in the decision report section of the meeting, so that will come in as item 6.4, which it is, before our information reports. And everything else is in the correct sequence. So, first up, we have our public forum. We've had 4 requests for speaking to our public forum today, and our first speaker will be Felicity Christian. Very warm welcome to you, Felicity. Please feel free to come forward, and we've got a 5-minute opportunity to present.
Good morning, everyone. Your Worship, the Mayor, Councillors, thank you very much for the opportunity and the time to speak this morning. My name is Felicity Christian, for those of you who don't know me. I've been a resident in Whangarei for 24 years, raised a family here and had an architecture practice for that time also. I love Whangarei and have a real passion and enjoy living here very much. I'm accompanied by my colleague today, Helen Beddon, and together we have a passion and a strong interest in the lower Dent Street, in the Dent Street Almond Court flats. And Helen and I have researched and compiled this report for you, which I think you have by email, and there are hard copies to be distributed afterwards. So our question, or our desire, is for the flats to be retained. To see them being demolished would be a great loss to the Whangarei fabric. The history, in 1935, the site was bought by Mrs. E. Armand. She got Alf Walker, a very prominent contractor, Whangarei contractor, to build these flats. They were cutting-edge design, they were the finest quality, they were crafted by all local materials, the Carmo bricks, milled, remilled. They can never ever be replaced or rebuilt, and 85 years on, they are still enduring very well. They need modernising. The bathrooms and the kitchens, I understand, are original, shows how well they were built. And they have been lived in by many, many generations of people. I understand one family that was removed from there last July had lived there for 30 years. So these have been homes, and they're not just cruddy old flats. They're very, very fine residential dwellings. And with a little bit of money and upgrading, they could be returned to being great inner city dwellings again. And this brings up the whole, in 1935 they were a response to the need for bringing inner city living, add to the vibrancy. Not everyone wants to live in the suburbs. And you know, these days we've moved to zero car policies. We want people to be able to walk to amenities. So these flats are just, you know, right back to what they were built for. And today we're facing the same need to bring vibrancy into the city. With question 2, it being a hotel site, I do ask the question, is this the right place? It's a very congested street. It's steep. Dense street traffic is already really a problem. How are they going to manage all the buses, taxis, deliveries? If it was an 80-bed hotel, there's a lot of car movements, and I'm struggling to see how that can be catered for in this already very congested area. I don't see that the site is big enough. I think it would be wonderful if there was some more residential development built on the site next door. But I implore you, I urge you to see the value that these architectural dwellings bring to the city. They're still very valid, and I know that there is very much public support to see that these retained. And like I say, they can't be replaced. They're one of a kind, and if we keep removing heritage items from our city, I think that would be a real shame, because these are the things that add value. Heritage, social amenity, you know, they have social heritage as well, and they're right on spec for today. So I urge you to, if you don't want to be in the realm of housing anymore, then open them up for others to take them on so that they can last another 100 years. And you know, the relationship that they have with the park, and you know, Mrs. Armand, or the owners, they were gifted. They were actually just gifted to the council. So, you know, they were gifted in good faith that they would be enduring. And I think to remove them would be a great loss, and I'm sure that I and other people support. Well, I know that I do. There's a lot of support to have these retained. So, thank you very much for your time. Please, I encourage you to look at the brochures that we've prepared and all the local experience and expertise that went into making these crafted buildings. The plasterwork is incredible. Remoon. So, you know, for sustainable value, carbon zero, you know, we're trying for carbon zero. We don't pull these things down and then you know, put all that effort into building again. So, thank you very much.
And Helen, thank you very much. Councillors, were there any questions for Felicity or Helen? Thank you very much, and thank you for producing that quality production that you distributed to the members. Councillors, our next speaker is Ethel Christensen. Ethel's tucked away in the back row. Very warm welcome to you, Ethel.
Good morning, Your Worship, the Mayor, Councillors. My presentation this morning is to do with the July flood and the build-up of the Saleyards Road, Vinegar Hill Road. We bought the property, or if you look at the map, we've got, our section is outlined by the blue lines. It's in behind the two sections on the corner. And the drain goes down and the culvert is marked on the road. Shortly after we went there, they built up the Saleyards Road by approximately 300 millimetres, and when they went round the corner into Vinegar Hill Road, I realised they were creating a damming effect. So I rang up Councillor Greg Martin, and he got them to scrape away the build-up that they had already done over the culvert area. and that looked okay. And then of course, once they've done that, they then put a seal it. I don't know how thick the seal is. And then about 2 years later, they resealed it again, which pulled it up a bit more. After the July, when we got the July flood, it was quite, well, it wasn't too bad, but it was a bit serious for us in our garage. Photograph 1, you'll see a line on that I drew on the shed. The first garage, that line was 260 millimetres of water went into the garage. That wasn't a big deal because it's not lined. So apart from the mess and the clean up, it dried out and it's okay. But the next garage on the right, just this going in there by about 25 millimetres, and that's lined. The room in there is lined. And photo number 2 just represents the house in relation to where the garage is. And photograph number 3, after the flood, or sometime after, there's a little bridge, concrete bridge over the drain. I put the level up on the drain, on the bridge, lined it up with the culvert and scoped it around, and noted where it hit the road again. It's about 40 metres from the culvert to the right is flat. From that first mark to the power pole is about another 70 metres, and it looked to me to go from nothing to about 300, which would mean it's risen that amount by 150 overall, which is creating that damming effect. And what I wanted to bring to the council was so that in the future it would go into any plan for future roading development there, so that it could be looked at, because the culvert itself is plenty big enough for normal rain, but once it blocks up we get a bad flooding effect. If the culvert blocked altogether, not when it blocked up or when it fills up, if it blocked up altogether we would be seriously flooded, but luckily we've got a hedge along there. There was a big pine branch about 7 metres long and 300 through, came down, hooked up in our hedge. Well, if that had blocked the culvert, we'd have got serious flooding. And I would hope that in the future, if any grading is done there, that they would drop the level on the Vinegar Hill side of the culvert. Because the culvert itself is big enough. If you made the culvert bigger, it would very likely scour the drain out down to that level. And then the banks would probably slip in. So that's our concern, is that because every time we go along in a few years' time, maybe we can put another coating of seal on it, which fills it up a little bit more. And also to the left of the culvert, it's probably dammed a bit there too, because it goes down to the culvert. It was probably, I couldn't measure that because of the hedges. So that's just what I wanted to, say my concern to the council for the future.
Well, thank you very much for your very clear presentation. I just have a couple of comments around flooding. Was your question? Was your home at all the flood waters? Did they look at coming into your home at all? And did you phone the council when through the storms and just?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. Really important to phone in. I think I mentioned this to you before. Then we've got an actual documented record of your concerns.
Right.
They will definitely be documented today. And good on you for coming to the public forum. And also, I guess, a timely reminder to all our members of the public, your local councillors, awesome, but sometimes they can't fix everything, but our system can. So thank you very much. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Christensen? Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, our next speaker to the public forum is Justine Rowe. Welcome, Justine. And Evan. The notes have been distributed around to the as well. Welcome.
Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. Thank you for your time today. As mentioned, the notes were provided, so I've just hit some high points and would like to leave some time for any questions. We've supplied a slide. I think the pictures speak a lot of words, so there's obviously a slide there of the flood and the maternal mortality that was earlier in the year, which has generated a lot of the recent discussion. So in further update to when I presented in regard to our long-term plan submission, pleased to update that we continue with the unity and how we working across our team, to the Harper Farmers NWDC, which I think has been instrumental. We've been very productive in the last couple of months, so it's good to see that the direction is still heading forward. From positives of that, we were able to confirm a flood pump protocol, which is something that's key to obviously minimising when we have the next rainfall event, around how we will work with the Harper to manage moving turners out. So that's been key, and I know Simon Charles has been working hard with us to achieve that as well. This unity has also led to us creating a smaller focus group, because whilst coming up with solutions is key for going forward, knowing how we're going to decide and fund those and the decision-making process I felt was fundamental to be able to implement solutions. So looking to have some governance discussions around that. And that has brought us to talk about ownership of the scheme. So we are meeting separately as a small team with the Harpu and also with Simon Charles and Western. We have a next meeting tomorrow, and we're looking at exploring some different ownership options around the scheme. In very brief points, the reason to that is it would split potentially operational management and development and infrastructure across the scheme, which are both quite different, and it would potentially, if we formed a trust as an ownership entity with stakeholders obviously across the same group, being NRC, WDC, Farmers, Harpu and potentially Fonterra, that may open up external funding opportunities which would then give relief to the targeted rates, which, as in the notes I provided today, the continuation of 100% reliance on the farmers through targeted rates to fund not only the operational running but actually the future development of the scheme, when there are far wider benefits than just the farmers. It's key to look at that differently. And with the debt repaid, we really strongly believe this is the opportunity to have a look at that. So the reason I brought it forward again today is I appreciate there's draft recommendations with regards to our submission, and I think very much for two of the pieces being acknowledged around drafting and we look to approve the working group, and also around the suspension of the next 2 years of the provisioned works to go forward. I would like to ask to revisit the point around the target rates continuing to include a large portion of over $1.2 million across the next 2 years to bring forward from the rates to collect for capital when there is currently no specified works that those funds would go towards. We acknowledge around the operational side, and we certainly would continue to support those being collected through the rates. But when there isn't, we know that we're looking for new workable solutions, collecting rates towards those targeted, I appreciate, where we don't know exactly how they're going to be dispersed. And potentially when the ownership entity may change, we'll be looking around with financial responsibility in relation to that. Sorry, to check my notes, I'm trying to be quick for yourselves. I think the key point also is around, if we want to point out around benefits to the wider community. I've become deeply involved in this in the recent years, and there's certainly some sideline comments I've heard in the community around it's just the farmers that benefit from farming response, and I certainly don't believe that's the case. There's much wider benefits. Harper I've very much enjoyed lately being more involved and learning more about that. So it's not something I was educated in school. So as an adult, I feel a bit awkward learning, but I'm really enjoying the opportunity. And I think that is something that fosters my sense of community as well, actually in the area.
Some of the other things too is that there's a lot of work being done down there now to enhance the environment, which is incorporating a lot of other people from within the district is helping that as well. So there's a lot of extra work being done within that area.
So really this was an opportunity that I wanted to make sure we brought forward and gave our last opportunity for clarification that we are supportive of the rates continuing, and we know there will be a portion of increase around the operational side, but in line with suspending the forecast works around the pump asset upgrade, we're still seeking some consideration around not collecting those capital funds. Absolutely through the working group, we are being more productive in the last 2 months than I think in the 3-4 years I've been involved. So I have great confidence that we're going to achieve quite notable historic change with this group. So we'd just like to take any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Justine. Councillors, any questions for either of our presenters? Councillor Cooper?
You mentioned the working group, Justine, and thank you for your presentation. It seems a wonderful example to me of the local farmers working together with the rest of the community, especially Maori, to get a result that benefits everybody. And am I hearing you right? You're a little bit worried that if things can't be accommodated, if we're not careful going forward, we may put that relationship in jeopardy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying we've got a lot of buy-in at the moment, and I think it's a real positive direction, and collaboration is acknowledged. And we've got some people that have not always been collaborative. To be honest, they've been awkward in the past, but we've managed to get their buy-in, and we're driving together because they have some belief that there's going to be change now. And I think this is about partnership, and that is why we're asking for consideration for putting in some emphasis on the other side to show that we can achieve things, and that will continue to drive the unity.
It sounds like great progress, doesn't it? We should congratulate you.
The changes will be for the better in the long run. It will enhance the whole environment, the whole scheme, and the environment as well, with the changes that we want to put forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, councillors, to ask questions that are specific that we can, that our presenters can answer quickly. Councillor Murphy, then Councillor Peters.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your presentation. And you talk about the potential there for the setting up of a trust. So I'm just interested, I know there are no specific projects that the capital funding has been set aside for, but with many trusts, have you considered the fact that to have an nest egg sitting there that you could apply for, often funders do require funding that you can match, partnership funding, so to speak. So have you considered that it may be quite useful having a nest egg sitting there, just so that if you are going to be applying for funding in the future, if that's the road that you go down, could be quite useful.
Absolutely. I think so there is a nest egg grant of 521,000. It's already currently held at the moment with the council, so there is a portion available. And farmers are very proactive around. They're willing to put money in themselves if there was a match opportunity. So part of the ownership opportunity would allow us to apply externally to fund opportunities that we haven't been able to meet eligibility for in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you for the presentation. Really interesting hearing about the project. Are you in contact with the Northern Regional Council and the Ministry for the Environment, considering environmental aspects of this?
Northern Regional Council, yes, we are meeting and discussing with them at the moment. We haven't contacted the second party, but we will look to do so as we go forward once the working group is organised.
But we are into the living waters and the frontier of living water one as well. So we are indirectly in
Thank you, councillors. And thank you again, Justine Rowe, for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you.
This is our final speaker in our public forum, is Brian May. Welcome, Brian.
Your Worship, councillors, members of the public, welcome. Mr. Furlong, Your Worship, know what one of my topics is to speak about today.
Mr. May, I will remind you under our standing orders that things that are repetitious or criticising elected members and staff, I will not allow today.
So you're denying me my freedom of speech at this
No,
meeting? You haven't responded at all. This has been going on for 2.5 years.
Mr. May, the correspondence between us is regular and frequent from the organisation. So today I allowed you to come. You asked for permission to speak on matters various. You do this every time. I have asked you specifically to be specific about the topic that you will be presenting to the public forum. You've chosen not to do that. I have allowed you to come to speak today, thinking that you may have topics that you have not already presented on to speak to us today.
Yes,
If
I
you
have some other ones.
Excellent. I'll hear those.
So what are you hiding? The divert report. This is 110,000.
Mr. May, I'll remind you that is a topic you have spoken on before, so your new topic is?
So why don't you release it?
Mr.
It's our money.
Any
These people
new
here want to
topics that
know.
you have?
Pardon?
Do you have any new topics you'd like to
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do, conclusively. Yep. We've got the 50,000 gold leaf for the underwaster. So what's happening there? Why is that being spent on there? People are asking about that. And also we have the Amanda flats, which we've just spoken about. They were gifted to the council. So where's the brains in the council that they get all the people out and then the hotel doesn't go ahead? God's sake, where's your due diligence? What are we doing here? These people have been thrown out. These flats were gifted, and now you want to knock them over. For goodness sake, what the hell's going on? This is not tenable for the ratepayers. People live there. They've got to live somewhere. You know accommodation's hard to get. Manu Road lights. Sometimes it takes 14 phases of the lights going from Western Hills to get up to Manu Road, into Manu Road by the hospital. And only 4 or 5 cars can go through. That needs looking at. Water care. There was mention of you guys joining water care in Auckland. So there'll be more ratepayers' money wasted because they charge for grey water, all this sort of stuff. They can't even run it properly themselves. The CEO said the dam was empty and it was waiting for it to rain. Do you want to join that sort of thing? Well, maybe you do. I'm not too sure. Building permit times for Form 5s are taking a bit of a while to come out according to builders. And they're electronically done. So basically, that needs to be revved up a bit. And what else have we got? The Jimmy Daly court case has been going on for 14 years now. 14 years. I suggest you look at section 14 of the Local Government Act.
Mr. Mayor, you have raised that one before.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the new ones, but I will draw the line on things that you have brought to this public forum before.
So we're going to get on and sort it out or what? We're just going to drag it on and financially ruin people. All right. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've raised some very valid points. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Mayor? Okay. That brings us to an end of our public forum. We move to item 5.1, the minutes of our meeting held on Thursday, the 22nd of April, 2021. Those minutes go from pages 47 of the agenda. And they also include the confidential section of the minutes. Do I have a move that they're through the proceedings of that meeting? Councillor Deaning is moving, Councillor Cockerello is seconding. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 5.2, the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday, the 13th of April. There's nothing confidential about that one. And can I ask somebody that there are true and correct record proceedings of that meeting? Councillor Collins is moving, Councillor Peters is seconding. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. They included the reconvened respect. Item 5.3. Councillor, the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 12th of April. Councillor Collins is moving that there are true and correct record proceedings of that meeting. And the second Councillor Murphy. Any corrections or amendments required?
Just a comment. Comment about on page 21 about a reconvening. It's been reported. I know you can't change things in the minutes, but that's the accurate. When we pass this, there's been no other addition to that motion. So I take this as being true or accurate account of the minutes.
Correct. They are a true and accurate record of the proceedings of the meeting. Councillor Cutfield.
Sorry, just skipping back for a moment. As we've skipped through the minutes. Item 5.2. I think page, please. So page 8, which included page 8.
We've marked that there are true and correct.
I know. I'm just why I'm responding is because you included the reconvened minutes on page 18.
Because it was the meeting.
Yeah, and Councillor Peters wasn't in attendance, but she seconded it. I'm being slightly pedantic, but if she can't second it if she wasn't in the meeting. Yeah, she wasn't at the reconvened, and you included that as part of it. So I'm happy to second if you need something different, because I was there.
I'm getting advice from our secretary that, so what are you saying?
but it wasn't a decision-making forum, they were just hearing from submitters. I would think that wouldn't be a problem.
It does raise a question around the correctness of the proceedings. So if we've recorded that they councillors seconded and they weren't in the room, then
The other councillors voted.
Actually, it's interesting because I remember these submitters, so I'm amazed.
you were there.
I'm pretty sure I was there.
Sorry to interrupt, not in attendance. The flow.
Yeah, I'm pretty
So
sure.
going back to the section that we're still discussing, the minutes of our meeting held on the
5 Street.
Page 18, not in
12th of
attendance.
May. Any other corrections that are required to those minutes? Not, I'll put that motion, those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Item 6.1, the notice of motion from Councillor Ken Cooper. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Your Worship. I bring this notice of motion to the Chamber today because it regards, I believe, the integrity of our council and chamber to do business.
Councillor Cooper, you will need to move and second your motion.
Please go. Well, I'd like to move the motion as written, thank you.
And do I have a second
I'll
for
second.
that? Councillor Hobbs, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I bring this motion because I believe that it cuts to the heart of the integrity of our chamber. And I guess a little bit of background is in order. As a new councillor, I attended with the rest of the elected members the orientation meeting which the Auditor General addressed. And he advised us as a council to establish one, a risk and audit committee, and two, appoint an independent chair. He believed, his reasonings he told us was that the independent chair helped with the transparency and the integrity of what we were doing. So we duly appointed, through the due process, an independent chair. That independent chair was appointed, we believe, by the Appointments Committee because of the skill that he brought in governance to the job. Now, after a while, it became apparent that that chair was not having the access to the confidential agendas and information that the council was taking in its business. And to me, that seems not how we should be doing things. It's not the spirit of the way the council should work, and it's not consistent with how we treat other people who we want to do business with us. So when someone comes to do business with us, whether it be, let's take for example, a building permit, under the heading of eliminating risk, we ask those people to go through a very strict process and detailed process, including reviews, which cost money. So, for instance, someone might do a geotechnical report, it gets peer reviewed, it costs money, quite rightly, to reduce the risk of this council, because we're acting on behalf of the other ratepayers. Yet,
Point of order.
Councillor Connor.
I respect what he's saying, but I see he's addressing the forum rather than directing us completely. So just I pulled it up on other people for other issues.
A reminder, Councillor Cooper, that you are addressing the meeting.
absolutely,
Thank you.
Councillor Conniff has been consistent, and that is what I require, and I think it is fair. So, talking about consistency, we ask people under the heading of risk to be particular, to go to expense, and we quite rightly do that. However, when it comes to our side of the business as governors, we have a situation where a person has been appointed to do a job and they are not being given access, in fact, they're actively being stopped having access to the information that in some cases they have requested. So I believe there are a couple of traps that we should try and avoid while discussing this issue today. The first trap is that the independent chair has been appointed, and that is not being discussed today. That decision has been made, and we are not here to relitigate that. Neither are we here to relitigate the terms and conditions of that Risk and Audit Committee. Those conditions are passed by motion of council and they are not in dispute today. All we're asking is that we live up to those terms and conditions. As part of my desire to get to the bottom of this, and you will see in the accompanying information, there has been correspondence with the Office of the Audit Committee, and then there has been a legal opinion sought by QC. That Queen's Counsel, Michael Heron, used to be the Solicitor General and expert in public law and advised the government in public law. So he has quite clearly stated in his opinion, and you can see it in your agenda, that the Chairman of the Risk and Audit Committee should have access to information that he may consider as relevant without impediment. And I could read many notes out of this, but I guess if we go to the terms and reference of the committee, the under risk, point 2, there is review and monitor council critical risk. And then if you turn over the page on the terms of reference to page 43 in your agenda, the Mayor has delegated all powers necessary in order for the Chairman to fulfil his role. So, just to read a summary of the legal opinion from the Queen's Counsel, he feels the Chair of the Risk and Audit Committee ought to be able to receive any material that he identifies may be relevant to the Risk and Audit Committee, and any material that the Mayor or a councillor wishes to put to him. So that's in part. Now, I guess there's another risk today that there will be a temptation to delay this decision. And I'd like to point out that we're now over halfway through our term as councillors, and yet we're still having these issues. It is in black and white here today, and I feel we owe it to the integrity of ourselves as an organisation to be clear and move on from this topic. I would point out that we take tens of millions of dollars from our community in the form of rates, and then we spend another more tens of millions of dollars in the form of capital works, and our community expects us to behave with probity. So thank you.
Councillor Cooper. Councillors, there are two parts of the recommendation. I will be speaking. I'm happy to support part 1. Part 2, I struggle with. Part 2, I struggle with because there's a direct parallel that I see in access to confidential information. We have Te Kāre as a standing committee, with half of the members of that committee are Māori that we have appointed, and they have signed a confidentiality agreement. That none of the issues that come in front of the Te Kāre committee that are confidential will be disclosed. We trust them to do exactly that. The direct parallel that I see is that we have an independent chair of the Risk and Audit Committee, and I will add that Risk and Audit Committees have only come about since I've been there, and that's in 8 years. Every term we've had a committee, but this is the first time we've had an independent chair. So the independent chair, of course, has signed a confidentiality agreement that whatever comes to his committee in confidence will be held in confidence. No problem. We trust that those processes. What I'm reading is that Councillor Cooper is suggesting that the independent chair should have access to all council's confidential information on committees and on council. Fundamentally, if there is an issue in the public arena and the chair has a request, that will be dealt with. But if he's requesting issues or items that we have come in front of us that have not come in front of the Risk and Audit Committee, then it's not appropriate for a councillor to speak with that person about that or for us to disclose it. There's a direct parallel. I hope you can see that. Councillor Cooper has talked about the requested, that the independent chair has requested information. I'm not sure what the processes are. I'm not sure how the independent chair could know that there's confidential information that he'd like access to. That calls into question, how do they know? We as a council have a risk management framework. We adopted this one in August last year. We have a risk management policy, and we adopted this one in October last year. The terms of reference for the Risk and Audit Committee are very clear. The purpose of that committee is to approve and review Council's risk management framework. Done. Review and monitor Council critical risks. If there are critical risks, we want to make sure that our risk management policy is being followed. It's very clear what our internal processes are around items that cover risk. Very important. No problem at all. If any of you, we've got 14 elected members, if any of you have concerns about risk, that you believe it should be on a risk agenda, for us to ask those questions, bring it on. To receive and review health and safety reports. In this term of council, bear with me, I just need to find my little bit of paper. We've had, it got disrupted with COVID, so we've had a few meetings of the Risk and Audit Committee. We appointed the independent chair in February of last year. The meeting we were to have in March was cancelled because of COVID. We've had our first meeting in June 2020. And all of the things that are appropriate to the Risk and Audit Committee have been on that agenda. We had another meeting in September, and we've had another meeting in December, and another one in March. They're quarterly meetings. If you've got, we are elected to do what's best for our district. We all swore that oath. So if we have concerns, yes, of course we bring those to the attention of our chief executive or a committee where it may come. But there is, for me, the release of or discussion of items that are confidential to council or its committees is not appropriate to discuss with anybody, whether they've signed a confidentiality agreement or not. It is absolutely relevant for members of a committee to have access to the confidential items on their agenda. Thank you. I will be taking the motion parts.
Thank you. Just a question for clarification. In the part 2 of the recommendation, it says councillors have the right to discuss confidential matters with the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee. But what you were describing then was something quite different. You were explaining that the recommendation stated that the chair should be able to request to see whatever confidential information he would like to see. So they're two quite different things.
So your question is?
So the recommendation is stating that councillors have the right to discuss confidential matters with the chair. You were speaking against the recommendation and you stated that you understood it that the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee would be able to request whatever information, confidential information they would like to see, but that's not what the recommendation states.
My comment was that if there are items that have come onto a council agenda or a committee agenda that were confidential, then they remain confidential. We under the code of conduct, we keep that. So, I think that item 2 would breach our code of conduct if a councillor were to discuss confidential matters, unless, of course, they're on the Risk and Audit Committee.
Yeah, questions here, Jen. Who puts the agendas together for the Risk and Audit Committee? For clarification.
Where's our Chief Executive? Where's our Chief Executive? Here he is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, the staff generally put them together, but they consult with the chair as for all our committees. So the chair of the committee is involved in putting together the agenda.
So, continue to a question then. If something is, an item is confidential, how are the staff to put that to the chair?
So in the event that it's an issue that is part of the committee agenda, we let the chair know. In the event that the chair wants to raise it and get a report on a confidential, or wants a report for a confidential issue, then they would ask for that to go onto the agenda. So the chair would ask for a confidential or report on something, and it may turn out to be confidential. I need to stress that about 98% of our reports, maybe 95%, but certainly the vast majority of our reports are not confidential. And the primary reasons that we do confidentiality are commercial sensitivity, so there's a very small number. Usually we're negotiating with someone about price, but yeah, that's the reason for the vast majority of the confidential.
Any other people wishing to debate?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I support the motion by Councillor Cooper. It's quite intriguing sitting here for long-term, as a long-term councillor, just saying that we have a chair of a standing committee, and yet we don't give her all the information to make a decision and get the best outcome from that. And even the QC states that it's a QC. He says, a councillor must, in the performance of their function, be able to share information, even confidential information, with the committee and chair responsible for spotting and addressing risk. Now, Your Worship, you know that some councillors around here did not want an outside chair. We wanted to have it internal so a situation like this did not arise. But that's not up for discussion. What's up for discussion is the ability for the chair to do the best for our ratepayers and this council. By limiting the amount of confidential, and our CEO just indicated, there's very little confidential information that goes to this chair anyway. I cannot then imagine why we're putting assertions out there that our chair of our Audit and Risk Committee cannot be trusted. I think that's absolutely appalling, and I certainly will not be voting. I will be supporting a motion on that alone.
Councillor Holmes, nowhere, no person so far has called into question the integrity of the independent chair. There is nothing to do with trust issue here at all.
That's good, because we established that. That's good, so it's nothing to do with trust.
Just as we do with trust any external independent.
Thank you. We've got some major reforms going on at the moment, and our ratepayers are probably not aware of them, but our Audit and Risk Chairman should be. All the water reforms going on. Surely that's going to be impacting our council more than any other single issue at the moment. And yet our Audit and Risk Committee is set up to protect this council against outside interests or risks. The water reform, local government reform, all these ones should be an agenda item for Audit and Risk Committee. Every one of them. And then we've got little things like creating an airport, looking at an airport site. All those ones. Surely our Audit and Risk Chairman should know the details behind that. There's more information on the website than we give our Chairman of the committee. Why is that? That is fundamentally wrong. You know, our standing orders, had a good look through last night. It's been changed. Over recent years, this has been changed because it used to be the Chairman was responsible for the agenda. Now you just heard from our CEO, the CEO is now responsible for the agenda.
Councillor Holmes, again, I will correct you. This is not what the Chief Executive said. The Chief Executive said that agendas are set up by staff with the support of the chair of each of the committees.
But I'm quoting what's in the standing orders. In the standing orders, it says the CEO is responsible. So that's what I'm saying.
That you are correcting that?
Yes, I know I'm correcting it. So why is there so much concern about this? Why? Look, we're meant to be as a team here working for the best outcome for our ratepayers. surely all players must have the same game plan and be able to talk about issues so we can come to the right decision. Audit and risk, you know, it was implemented under your leadership, and you've got to ask, what are we achieving if the chairman doesn't get information to be able to chair the meeting correctly? Because all the members around here know what's going on one issue, and we stranded our chairman up here. I just find it fundamentally flawed, and that's why I'm supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Any further debate? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. Many of us in this council are members of working parties, and there is some amount of confidentiality involved, and that's partially been outlined by our Chief Executive at this point. I don't have a problem with part 1 of this resolution. I do, however, have a major issue with part 2. To have councillors being able to run off and have private conversations with the chair, who I have the greatest respect for on that, is not in the best interest of the committee as a whole. The Risk and Audit Committee is a combined responsibility, and as such, if any one of the members of this forum have an issue, we all have the right to know that, especially if it is going to be held in confidence with the chair. So I support part 1.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Peters?
I support the motion, and part of that is what is a risk? You know, what is a major risk? I mean, is it health and safety, or is it some of these things that Councillor House has been talking about that we consider? And I think that those risks are risks. You know, I think it's a good thing to have an independent chair. That person is not elected. That person can be objective. It's not, you know, that person is not under some of the stresses that councils are under. And the person that we have appointed is actually someone with a lot of experience. And, you know, I really think that he should have access to the issues that are critically important. And that's why I'm supporting both parts of this. Yeah.
Councillor Peters? Councillor Cutforth?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not terribly comfortable with, well, I'm not terribly comfortable with number 1, as people know, because I was very comfortable with having an independent chair, but I'm certainly not that comfortable with number 2, and partly, I don't pretend to be an expert in these things, but it seems to me that the role of the Risk and Audit Committee is not an activist one. It's, when you look at the words that are used around the terms of reference, it's to provide oversight, it's to review, it's to monitor, it's to provide assurance to council about control. So it's a more of, if you like, of an administrative role on the process and the way in which we manage risks. And what I feel that recommendation 2 is moves us more into is more of an activist role. Even when I look at Michael Heron's comments, it's suggesting that the chair is able to receive. So I'm just concerned with recommendation 2 that it moves into a far more sort of proactive role, and it ends up potentially taking over the role of potentially all other council committees, actually, because all other council committees deal with specific areas of work. If you take things like Three Waters, I think it's looking at what is the risk to council, but this is, and the potential where that may lead this council to, but within that actual framework, rather than dealing with the debate around the issue as a whole. And I think that's where this Councillor Cooper's recommendation is leading us to, and I'm not that comfortable with risk and audit committee going into a more activist role.
Point of clarification, Your Worship.
Councillor Cooper?
I just want to make sure I understood what Councillor Cutford said then. Are you having, what you're saying is you're not happy with us being proactive around risk?
Councillor Cooper?
Sorry.
No, that's not a valid point of view.
Well, sorry. Apologies, I was wrong.
Any further discussion or debate? Councillor Benny?
Yeah, so the Risk and Audit Committee was quite foreign to me when I came into council, and I saw it as quite a valuable tool for council to identify risk. And Councillor Cooper, to be fair to him, has been going on about this for quite a while, and I've suggested to him you go and do what's necessary to identify what you need, what support you have in your assertions that it's not operating as it should be. He's highlighted some key points for me. One is the terms of reference, the review and monitor council critical risk, and that goes with Councillor Cutforth's assertion that he's proactive. She doesn't think he should be proactive. That really says he should be proactive.
Point of order, Your Worship. I'm really talking about the terms and reference of the committee.
Okay, as the head of the committee, the review and monitor council critical risk is part of the terms of reference. I think Michael Heron's views are pretty clear on the fact that he should have access to confidential information, and it makes sense to me, and it always has made sense to me. And I'm glad that Councillor Cooper has done what he's done. It's clarified quite a few things for me, and I'm happy to support the motion.
Councillor Benny? Councillor Murphy?
Thank you. I like that Councillor Cooper said at the beginning that some people might say it's not the right time to make this decision, and I think he said something about the fact that some people would maybe like to put it off, and I'm one of those people. I agree with the first part of the resolution, but the second part, and it's interesting, I mean, it is good to have this debate, because really now I look back and I remember the debate we had about whether we should appoint an independent chair, and some thought yes, some thought no. At the time I thought yes, it would be very valuable to have an independent chair. But taking into consideration that when you're setting up a committee, that's the time to, to understand the reasoning and know exactly what role that independent chair has, and understand what delegations and responsibilities they have, so you can make it clear, at the beginning of the term. And also, it's also in our code of conduct, so it can be made clear when we debated again our code of conduct and made some amendments to that. That's the time then to be clear about, confidentiality, what would constitute a breach of confidentiality, who we can talk to, etc. As a councillor, I take my oath of confidentiality extremely seriously, and I feel that at this stage I don't feel comfortable with the second part of that recommendation. I feel that if there was something that I wanted to raise and have taken to the risk and audit committee, I could do that as a councillor. I could do that by coming to the mayor, by coming to my other councillors, by coming to the chief executive or one of our managers, and then it could be taken from there. So I won't be supporting this resolution today just because I don't think the timing is correct. I understand the principle that Councillor Cooper is trying to raise, in good spirit and good faith. Sure, it would be great to be able to disclose whatever we want to the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee, but I just feel cautious because of what I've just discussed. Also, Michael Heron's legal opinion is just that. It's just a legal opinion. Like we've all got an opinion, and you can get, every lawyer will have a different opinion. What I see in the further information from Local Government NZ is that they state, noting that the information should be appropriate for them to see in line with their mandate and the Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference. So it's actually not black and white. So as much as I support the spirit of what Councillor Cooper is trying to bring across, I would prefer that this is debated at the start of the next council term when that committee is being set up, and so that's my thing for today.
Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, just a question of procedure. We're taking this in two parts, and I would like to have a procedural motion moved for the second part, and that would be that it lie on the table. And I'm looking at the first part, and I know that...
One moment, Councillor Innes.
Yeah.
You have posed a very first time that we've had to deal with this as a question. Speaking of good standing orders,
Your Worship, to get around that, because the question would be, since part one is actually BAU, wouldn't you be able to do the procedural motion over top of both items?
it would be in accordance with standing orders if a procedural motion that the item being discussed should lie on the table and not be further discussed at this meeting, that would cover the whole thing. And I think that's probably the item would be better to lie on the table, the whole item.
Considering that the first part is BAU.
So, Your Worship, I move that the item lies on the table.
So, Councillor Innes is moving a procedural motion that the item of business being discussed should lie on the table, not be further discussed at this meeting. Do I have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Demon? There is no discussion and debate. I will put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Those against, if Councillor Cooper, if a division is to be called for, please indicate it before I've put the motion.
Sorry.
Technically, I'm putting the motion. Those against?
Against. I'm against.
I will need to, because the clever naysayers will louder than the yes ones. So I will actually ask for a show of hands. Those in favour, please raise your hand.
Councillors Murphy, Cutforth, Reid, Innes, Deeming, Pockerillo, and Her Worship the Mayor.
Those against?
Councillors Benny, Connor, Peters, Cooper, and Hulse.
It's carried. It brings us to the next item. Item 6.2. Temporary road closure for events policy review. Welcome through. Members of the gallery, if you wouldn't mind, we are still continuing the meeting. Appreciate you good discussions outside. We have a recommendation that Council approves and adopts the temporary road closure for events policy.
I'll move it.
Councillor Cockrell is moving, Councillor Deering is seconding. No, just Councillor Cockrell.
Your Worship, the staff have produced a very good policy there, the temporary road closures. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's not much more I can add to it than what the staff have already put together. And yeah.
Further discussion? Gosh, that's silence, everybody. No further discussion. I agree with those comments, Councillor Reid.
One thing, Your Worship, it seems like everything that this lady and her team do turns to gold for us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's the lightest touch.
Councillor does.
So road closures will turn into gold. They'll be paid. Any further discussion? Councillor Copperill, right at the start. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. Item 6.3, Walking Events Centre. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Hobbs is the chair.
But I will be available to answer questions.
Is also a trustee. Are you remaining in the debate?
No, I think
Stepping back? Excellent. Thank you. There was a recommendation that Council endorses a 31 October 2021, or soon possible, timeline to establish, for establishment of a new trust. I will move the recommendation. Councillor Innes is moving, Councillor Reid is seconding. Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Worship. I see this really as an administrative item, and in doing that, there's a need to appoint the new trust, and there needs to be a time set for that, and the 31st of October is one, and in terms of the recommendation, or sooner if possible, the transition period is going to be reasonably intense, involved in terms of having a look at the existing governance structure, also management, and moving into the new governance structure. So I think that the 31st of October will give adequate time, so supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Innes. Any further discussion? Just to, can I confirm that the current trustees are prepared to stay on the trust until that time?
So current trustees are as per their current appointment terms. We do have 2 appointment terms that will be coming up for review at the end of June. So we'll bring that to you next month for the transition period.
Your Worship, do we need to create an amendment to extend those to the 31st of October?
Dominic's just saying that they will come to...
Through the chair, we'll bring that to the June meeting. So in the agenda, we've outlined a number of things that we're working through to bring through to the June meeting, and we'll just provide that continuity.
As a follow-on question, wouldn't it be logical to do that as a right part of this motion, since the fact that we are just extending it?
I think it's, from a procedural perspective, we need to do this first, and then because the current trustees have got to a term, and then a paper will be brought for us for consideration at a future date. We couldn't preempt this decision today. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. Item 6.4, supplementary item, development of 8 to 10 Dent Street. We have recommendations, and there are 5 recommendations. Is there a mover for those?
Your Worship, I'd like to move the recommendations that are here with 5 an adjustment, and the adjustment in 5 would be hotel and or high density residential development.
So you're adding the words into recommendation 5, approves the marketing of the property of 8 to 10 Dent Street in accordance for expressions of interest for an hotel and or high density residential development. Do I have a second for those motions?
No.
Councillor Copperill? Councillor Innes?
Thank you, Worship. I really appreciate the presentation that was made earlier in terms of heritage buildings, in terms of the flats, but I'm also mindful of the growth of Whangarei. And unfortunately, in these situations, there are cases such as the flats that are looked at in terms of development. When I look at the city centre plan, the property is regarded as a strategic site. And when I look at the work that the property group has undertaken there, they look towards the site as being for hotel and residential development. It's really on that basis I look at adding that addition so that we can look towards high density residential development as an option as well. So it's with the work that's been undertaken by council in terms of catering for the growth of the city that I have moved the motion that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Innes. Councillor Cockburn.
There's a question there, Madam Chair, in relation to the modification of point 5. Does that also mean modification of point 1 as well?
I'm told yes, it does. How does it, what have we got? Okay, yes, good point. So, Councillor Innes, you've...
yeah, I see that.
Are you wanting to add those words and or high density residential development to
exactly.
one as well?
Exactly.
Thank you. So, move it and second, you're both happy with that?
And the second question is, in relation to all the information that's listed here, there doesn't seem to be any identification about the gifting of the land. So how has that been dealt with?
I would say that was new information that we received today. Is it? Will we remove that?
Through the Chair, originally when the council obtained the property, and Mike Hibbert would be able to give detail, it was taken under the Public Works Act or something similar. When council decided in the mid-2010s to go out to develop the site as a commercial development, they went back to the original families who had taken the land from or had been gifted through, and they'd gone through the appropriate process with those parties in first instance.
Councillor Murphy.
Just a question. The information that was meant to be handed out, could we also copy of that for our perusal?
It was emailed. Would you have a laptop?
It's nice to get things. Councillor Cooper.
I wasn't quite sure I might missed it. The question was to Tony, was the land gifted or did we obtain it under Public Works Act, or is that the same thing?
Through the Chair, I couldn't tell you that. Mike was meant to be here. He's covered that first thing. My understanding was obtained under Public Works Act.
Okay, so that would be something that might require a thing to lay on the table, mightn't it?
It might do.
Just a question from me. I mean, that's quite an important point for me too. That was new information to me today, and I would like some clarification on that.
It was resolved. It was resolved previously as to whether it was gifted or taken under the Public Works Act. It has been resolved.
Do we know that?
Yes, when we went through the process earlier.
That doesn't answer my question in the
He was going to be here by now. He was going to be here at 10 o'clock, so I can ring him again to come over if you like, there's someone's way.
I can.
Your
footsteps might be Santa Claus. I might just adjourn this item to wait for the appropriate staff member to be present. I apologise to our members of the gallery who are wanting to see the progress on this, but that is a point that's been asked for. If hopefully Mike will have that information, perhaps we need to forewarn in that. So, yeah, but I've adjourned it and we asked that. So I've adjourned it until the staff member, I don't know the time, is that, can I do that under the procedural? No, because we're not going to have the person in the room again. Then I'll move a procedural motion that we adjourn, the item be adjourned until we have, what's the appropriate title? Commercial property manager, Thank you. Sabini is seconding that. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7.1, financial report for the 10 months ending 30 April 2021. We've got a recommendation on page 72 that the Council notes the operating results for 10 months ending 30th of April 2021. I have a move for the recommendation. Councillor Reid is moving and Councillor Cullen is seconding. Councillor Reid.
I'm sure Mr. Adcock will bring us up to speed.
Would you like some commentary from our corporate CEO, General Manager? Ellen, any updates or things that are relevant?
Thank you, Worship. The main points of the report are that we're currently holding a favourable variance of $22.7 million, particularly year-end $23.6 million. That's not as rosy as it appears, because this isn't driven by OPEX, it's by CAPEX and CAPEX subsidies. So the money that's coming to the system is largely driven, the variance is coming through from government funding post-COVID, related to water reforms, etc., or the other contributions coming through. So this is money which has come to us either to do CAPEX projects now, so it comes in through profit and loss, goes out the balance sheet as capital projects, or as subsidy paid to us, which we pass on to other councils in Northland. That's the MB fund funding. If we've got the for all of Northland, then are passing on to Far North and Kaipara. So if we strip all of that out, we're pretty much bang on target in terms of our operating income expenditure for the year. So while showing a $23 billion surplus, that is not free money for us to spend. It is committed to capital projects largely.
Come on, Alan.
Any further discussion on the report? Councillor House?
Yeah, Your Worship, I've asked a couple of times and still haven't received it from senior management about a breakdown of how much artificial money has been putting into our account. It's listed on page 73, but it's only piecemeal, because there's a whole lot more going into the parts that we don't seem to have here for. We need to know exactly how much money we've got from the government in the way of TIF funds, tourism funds, Shane Jones's fund, to be more accurate to say, well, what are these covering and what are our rates covering now? Because it's getting really blurred in there. Yeah, it's fine to get a report like this, but no detail. It's the detail I want, and I've been asking for it. It's pretty simple to get.
Is there any additional detail that you can provide in a future report?
Through the Chair, I refer you to page 80 of the report. Under the first section, operating income, the subsidies and grants, we're forecast to see around $18 million additional funding there in subsidies. Further down in the third section there, the MB Tito Tokala agreement, there's $13 million of subsidy there. So together they largely cover the item you're talking about.
Yeah, but this, Madam Chair, this is, our corporate manager knows that, and I can read about it. What I want to know is, like, you go past Torrey Island at the moment, see all the bike park development going in. I want to know how much has been funded from outside interest and how much we're funded. There's 3.2 million going from the government into that project. I want to know exactly how much of those projects is funded by our ratepayers or the government, because we never had that government before. So we're getting artificial money coming into our day-to-day lives now. We never had that before. So I want to be specific on nailing that down. Surely I could get that information. It'll take probably a quarter of an hour, someone's time.
Through the Chair, happy to provide that. Maybe we can meet outside this meeting and give me exactly what you want. We'll get it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Just on the sustainable solvents, right back at the beginning, I was just wondering, are we likely to, just like a little update on that, whether it's going to cost us any more? Sustainable solvents.
Yes, I can provide an update on that.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. discussion on the financial report. Councillor Cockburn.
Chair, I'm well aware that a lot of the funds that have come in through on page 76, as an example, or even show that there is greater money coming in subsidies and grants, and there's great development happening in North and Whangarei, which we can rightly see. I'm just conscious that that money that's been going in there, will that be allocated to the correct areas that's meant to be going into development contributions?
Ellen, what's the process for allocation of development contributions to the projects in the plan?
We only collect development contributions where a growth project has been identified in the long-term plan already. So the funding coming through from government for these things won't affect those projects because they were facility for things outside our plan. By those are additional projects. So nothing has changed in terms of how we identify which projects will be DC funded.
Yes, I think Councillor Cockerell's question specifically was, with development contributions when they are paid, what's the mechanism to ensure that it's allocated to the projects that are within the LTP, with the growth component?
Effectively the line item.
I've only referred Mr Weston to that one, because they're covered in the machine controls ESPN model.
Thanks. Thank you, Simon.
The funds that I received through DCs are not junkyard. However, they go into council's overall finances. However, they can only be used in terms of the overall calculation for the projects that are identified as growth projects in the schedules of the DC policy.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm well aware that the process, what I'm asking for is, if there is a growth in a specific area and there are projects which are put down for growth in that area, are those projects then brought forward because all the funding is then received for those projects, or do we wait till the time frame when they come through in the long-term plan to when they've been done?
I'd love to think the development contributes to the whole cost of growth projects.
Again, through the Chair, when we collect the DCs, they're not allocated to a specific project. Many are catchment based or cover the entire district. So we don't identify a specific project at the time the DCs are levied through development. So there is no one-to-one action possible in this case.
Through you, Madam Chair, the process of making DCs, we all understand the process of making DCs where we turn around and predict 10-year programs and we say these are the projects going in. I would have thought that there would be line items for each one of those projects. As a portion of those DCs would come in, they would be assigned to each one of those projects in that area, like I would do within my business.
Oh, gosh, you get it again. Simon?
If growth is in fact happening quicker within a particular area, and capacity is being used up by the growth of that area, then there are opportunities to bring projects forward. And that may happen from time to time, that we advise council either in between LTPs to bring projects forward, or indeed at the next LTP to bring the project forward to deal with that growth.
And Dominic's got something to add.
Maybe through the Chair, just to add that you'll recall that we have a schedule of projects, but those are done by activity, and there is a so under legislation, it's the activity which you levy on. There's a 10-year forward, a 10-year backward, and projects within the activity can change by decision of council. So if the project's happened, you collect the funding, but it is under, say, the wastewater activity within that catchment. So there's two things at play: the activity, the catchment, there's projects underneath, but those projects can change and you make those decisions.
It's a question around DCs. Probably people know it, but I'm unclear, so I'll ask if that's okay, and that is that DCs come in, I think, as a part of as a result of operations. So are they considered operating money or capital money, because they need to go to capital works?
Through the Chair, in terms of accounting classifications, they're classified as income, even though it's for capital, as you quite rightly point out. That's why when we do our balanced budget calculations, the DCs are removed from that. So they do flow through the income statement, but they're not part of our balanced budget assessment, which is based on true operating costs.
A follow-up question, if I may. Where we have communities who want to do work and let's say it's something for, say, a cycleway, and we struggle to get the money to give it a grant to do it because it is considered money coming out as operating expenses. Is that not a mechanism that we could move money over to the community so often they can do the project cheaper and so on and so forth? So is that a way around some of the problems that we've talked about, Councillor Ben's identified and so on and so forth? Or am I stretching a long bow?
Through the chair, it's a wonderful idea.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The legislation is very, very constrained in what we can do. Unless the project is identified, or the growth component of the project has been identified and qualified, that is included into DC policy, which we consult on through the long-term plan process. We can't spend on anything other than that. So if the cycleway growth element was in the long-term plan, it could fund it, but we can't simply move money around because we've got more than we thought we were going to.
So the answer will be to put more projects in case we get some money coming through. Have a category.
Through the chair, that course of action is your CFO.
Then we could meet any further reporting. Councillors, any further discussion on the financial report?
One more. In relation, and this was probably under Simon West Interior again, page 78 refers to transportation, where we have a revised budget of 11.9 million, and we have an actual deficit, should I say both deficits, but a deficit of 7.7 million. This seems like quite a bit in relation to roading, transportation, that is correct. But it seems that we're still getting a lot of complaints from our community where they're not seeing the transportation work actually being done.
I'll draw your attention that this is a financial report.
Yes.
So raising the funds in the infrastructure agenda would be totally appropriate, but some you may have
rather hard in the infrastructure when we don't actually have the amounts.
Kelvin's your man in the...
Through the chair, those, the fact that some deficits simply indicates that part of the activity is debt funded. So you notice there's several things on here which have a lot of capex, there are things which the rates and subsidy income coming through income statement is not enough to fund all everything that activity does. The balance is debt funded. The transportation, that's what exactly 11.9 means.
Kelvin, have you got anything to add to that?
Through the chair, there is a paper that's just been drafted to come to the next infrastructure briefing on transportation activities for the first 3/4 of this year, so that will be in the news.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to know. Any further discussion? I will put the motion. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We now have...
It was here 2 seconds. We probably need both parties, I'd say.
Take 7.2.
There we go.
So we now are in the happy position of having our commercial property manager in the room, so I can bring the adjourned item for development of 8 to 10 Bed Street into consideration now. Warm welcome to you, Mike, and back again, Tony. Mike, I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to be updated on a question that was, in our public forum this morning. We had speakers to the public forum, and in their presentation, they noted that the land that the Armoured Court flats are on were gifted to council, and then we just wanted to councillors have got some questions as to how that, then Tony talked about the Public Works Act. So can you enlighten us through the process?
Certainly. My apologies for not being here earlier, councillors. So through you, Worship, in 2012, when the due diligence was done on both these sites regarding the future development, through Thomson Wilson, Council's legal advisors, what we can confirm is that the Brown family owned the property at 8 Dent Street and the Bassett family owned the property at 10 Dent Street. Basically, those families offered to sell the properties to council and they were transferred. The Bassett family in 1950 and the flats in 1965. As part of the special consultative process we had to have, because the purpose of the acquisition changed in 2012, we went through a process so that we could develop hotel and a hotel development. It required us to obtain waivers from both those families under the Public Works Act. So that will complete.
Does that clarify the question, Councillor Benny and Councillor Cooper? That's right.
So, just to be clear, they actually were sold, were they?
They were sold. I don't have it here. I think from memory, it's around £25,000 at the time.
Okay, so it was a clear sale. Fair enough.
Just a follow-up question. So why did we require a waiver then?
Because standard practice, if council acquires a piece of land for a purpose, it's on the pretense that that's what we're going to do. In 2012, council decided to change that original purpose, which required a special consultative process. So we went out through submissions and we had verbal and written submissions. On the advice of Thomson Wilson, it was suggested that we actually obtain a waiver from those families so that they were up to date with the reasons as to what we were doing. More of an administrative precaution.
Just on that question, on the back page of the information we're given, it says transferred to Fairness Council for purpose of municipal reserve. Is that what it was originally? Changed over to that?
Just reading from here, one of the proposed municipal reserve, and I think the other one was civic, reserve for civic purposes. But there are two original reasons for the position.
So, like with the special consultative process that we went through, that the council went through in 2012, to designate the site as a for hotel development, does that status apply today?
It's for hotel and accommodation purposes.
Hotel and accommodation purposes, and that applies as of today.
That's correct.
Councillor Cuthberth.
Worship, I would like to move an amendment, if I may, which I think can be distributed. I have some work on it. Thank you. Shall I read the amendment? We have read it for ourselves. We read the amendment for the members of the public gallery, or you do that, Your Worship, for me?
You're moving it, you will.
Well, okay, so I'll read the amendment, which is that council approve the sale of 8 Dent Street, Armwood Flats, to a suitable developer, conditional upon the purchase of retaining building for inner city housing. And the second point is that council agree that the proceeds from the sale of 8 Dent Street be used towards the development of senior housing on 10 Dent Street to be retained in council's senior housing portfolio.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthberth. Do we have a second for that amendment?
I'll second it for discussion.
Councillor Murphy's got a pencil up strongly, as opposed to I'll second it for the...
No, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthberth.
Thank you, Worship. I will stand because it's important for me. With the demise of the Copthorne Hotel proposal, we have now got the chance to really consider what's the best approach for us to take with Armand Court. And I'd just like to raise a few points that I think councillors need to take into account with regard to the amendment I'm putting through. We all agree we've got a housing shortage in Whangarei. And we all agree, I think, that we have a CBD and an inner city that's under challenge for many reasons. And we all agree that we want to bring life and we want to bring people back into the CBD in our inner city area. And I think we recognise that even in the last year, COVID's had quite an impact on our CBD, but not as badly as we'd expected. But certainly it's another one of the sort of 1,000 cuts that's happening to our inner city. And it was for that reason really that council set up, just during and after, just after COVID, the CBD Spearhead Group to look at, and I'm quoting, what could be done from a council perspective to facilitate the development of inner city living. And Councillor Deeming, Councillor Reid and myself were part of that group. And one of the things we found when we started looking at how to develop accommodation in the inner city was that our main hope, which was that commercial property developers could take their first floors and turn them into residential, was, while a great idea in theory, in practice was not something that was really going to happen for a range of reasons. And it certainly wasn't going to deliver the living options that we really needed. So it's sort of in that context I think we need to also look at Armand Court. So just turning to the Armand Court flats, I've removed the flats that were gifted to council because that's obviously, you know, we're not quite sure about that. They were built in the 30s and they're one of the very few heritage properties that survive in the city area. And as such, as Felicity Christian has commented, they're part of the fabric of the inner city, but they add character and they add identity, and they're a real link to our past, and they add that to our inner city, and they add housing. The flats aren't a part of our commercial property portfolio. They're part of parks, and they have been managed in the past as community property. The state of the flats, when we go and look through them, is entirely council's responsibility, and I think it's actually a telling indictment on us that they're in the condition that they are that require some work. That condition is not insurmountable. They are fundamentally, structurally sound. They have great bones, like myself. But internally as a group, they certainly need significant work to bring them up to a habitable standard. I'm not suggesting, in this recommendation, I'm not suggesting that council does that work. I understand there's little appetite around this table for us to do that, and I completely get that. But the property, not just the land, the property is a council asset, and it has value. We have the opportunity here for, I think, a win-win. We sell the asset, we'll specify that the building be restored and used for inner city residential accommodation. And I think, reflecting Councillor Innes's desire, it's likely to be high quality inner city residential accommodation. I'm confident in the current environment that this project will elicit plenty of genuine interest from people. By doing that, we immediately meet two of our objectives. We keep, if not gain, inner city accommodation, and certainly better quality accommodation than Armand Court has been for a while under our management. We also gain income from the sale. We realise the value of that asset. But wait, there's more. We then take the proceeds from the sale of Armand Court and we put it towards the development of senior housing on the site below. Ideally as part of a joint venture with another party, either a private developer or not-for-profit or a government agency or a combination. I think there's lots of opportunities for that site below for a mix of different housing providers. By doing this, we end up with a significant addition to the numbers and types of people living in our inner city. Potentially a real mix of people, from private renters to young or ageing hipsters who may own or rent a renovated Armand Court, and older people. To those who say we've put enough money into senior housing, I need to remind you. Housing is one of the highest priorities that councillors identified at the beginning of the term. We have a growing ageing population. We have 10,000 more people over 65 living in whāngai than we did when our last pensioner units were built. Our current pensioner housing is almost as old as the people living in them. They are often far from services, and so we do need to build more. Government will not do this for us. They have plenty of other housing needs to deal with. It's up to us, and we need to address it seriously and significantly. On the positive side of putting that money from the sale of the flats into senior accommodation, ideally in 10 Dean Street. On the positive side, we've had groups of older people, all their reps, coming to us through the long-term plan process, talking to us about ideas for different types of and models of housing, tiny house developments, joint ventures, say also Stonehaven, those type of developments. So the money from the sale of Armour Court, which mainly, just by the way, included older tenants and people who've been there for a long time, allows us to explore the range of options that older people in whāngai are looking for us to support. So, councillors, I really urge you to support this amendment. I think it gives us the opportunity for many, many wins, and I'm really hoping for your support today. Thank you.
Just a question. Number one, conditional upon the purchaser retaining the building for inner city housing. Is that forever? If I was a developer and that was a condition and that those had to remain in place forever, I think we'd struggle to find a purchaser for it. As it reads, it's quite a restricting condition for any developer to come along, I would imagine.
So that's a question. I wonder if might you be able to respond to that question?
Your Worship, it's probably more of a legal question. I'd have to say, based on experience with working with Mr. Matthias, that as soon as the sale and purchase is done, then really there's nothing in there that can stop that changing in the future by that being unsold, for example. I think the main question would be, is it financially viable for that to happen to attract enough interest from developers to make dollars?
Yeah, that didn't really. So my this is, it says specifically conditional upon them retaining the building for inner city housing, so that they could not touch the building, and that would appear to be quite a, as I say, a restricting condition, and which would not be that attractive, I wouldn't think.
Well, it's really a question, I guess. When we say put the tender out, when we sell the land, say if we sold the land to the Copthorne for a hotel development, we would have been able to specify it was for a hotel development. So it's really specifying that the development has to be for restoring the building for inner city housing. Once that's done in 50 years' time or whatever, if the owner then wants to do something differently with it. But from our perspective, what we're doing is saying when you tender it out, it has to be for inner city housing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. My fear is that in 20, 30, 40 years, somebody will on-sell it, and unless there's a covenant or a caveat or very, very strong legal mechanism, and they could end up in the hands of somebody as irresponsible as council and fall to bits, and they want to, you're raising a question. I have many questions also, and it's part of the difficulty of doing these things on the fly. I'm wondering whether we should do something similar and laying it on the table and have some really robust discussion. Although Councillor Willow,
another question, Madam Chair. And it's similar in line with what Councillor Benny said. The line in 1 says, conditional upon purchase or retaining the building for inner city housing. Now, if a developer purchases it to do exactly that, but then goes through and finds that it's then uneconomical for them to do that, would they have any grounds to demolish the buildings?
Yeah, these are legal things that we do need to check. So I can't answer that question.
And the next question is, through the submission process and through what we heard earlier, it's been highlighted that the buildings are historical of nature. Can I have the staff please answer what historical aspects of that building there are actually is?
Or I think it's an unfair question of staff. Mike Scotty, Peter.
Through your worship, in 2004, part of that due diligence, Heritage New Zealand were contacted, and the buildings from a Heritage New Zealand perspective have no heritage status.
So if it didn't meet their criteria, that doesn't mean to say that they don't have historic value or heritage value, but from their perspective, it's a category 1 or 2. Is that would be fair to say?
It had no status. So.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Peters.
Thank you. It comes to no surprise that I support this motion because of the housing need, and anything that delivers quickly some more housing, 6 houses, is really important. You may think it's only 6 houses, but unless we do start actually building or renovating houses and getting them occupied, we're not actually moving. The second part of the recommendation that we use the money to develop the lowest site, number 10. Is it number 10? Yeah. Also I support. I think that gives inner city living a vibrancy to the inner city, and can marry with some of the other projects that we are developing around the area. We are considering a hotel already, for example, and I don't think you need to do 2 or 3 of the same thing at the same time. The council's put me on Creative Northland. Creative Northland is very interested in this building because of its specific nature, and whether or not it's been specified as a heritage building at the time we investigated it 8 years ago. They now are very interested in this remaining as part of the Whangarei-like landscape. So yeah, on both on my artistic side and also on my side that really wants housing, I really endorse these 2 recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. I have Councillor Murphy and Councillor Dean.
Yeah, I mean, this is complicated because I definitely don't want to see these flats demolished. You can't rebuild flats of that quality these days. My husband's a builder and I know the toxic materials that we use in the building industry these days. You know, treated pine, MDF particle board, none of it will ever compare to hardwood remove floors. I'm not sure what the quality of the structure's like and walls, but anyway, my preference is something completely different. And that's because, and I'd like to support the amendment. My worry though is if we did sell them for whatever $4 or $5 million, the person who buys them and does them up is then going to have to rent them for a certain amount to get return on their investment. My preference would be that council retain them, renovate them. We're the only people that can actually rent out housing at a cost that's actually affordable enough for people to live in. My fear would be that if a developer buys the flats, you know, does them up, what are they going to have to rent them out for? So, oh gosh, I don't want the flats demolished. I want more council housing, but I feel like there might be another option in there somewhere. So
I'm actually sorry that Councillor Murphy spoke before me, because I think she might have seconded what I wanted to move, which is that this lie on the table while we have a robust discussion, preferably in confidential, amongst ourselves, because there are a lot of, I mean, I can't move it now because I seconded the amendment, but I can see that the amendment as it stands is
Actually, Councillor Murphy did second the amendment, so you can move a procedural motion, yes.
Oh, cool, okay.
Because she had a pencil higher than your muttering or seconded today.
Oh, okay, in that case, I move that it lie on the table.
Thank you, Councillor Demon. Do I have a seconder for that procedural motion?
Can I second that?
You've just spoken, so I will second it. So we have a procedural motion. I will put that motion. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No.
Yet clever numbers. Those in favour, I do need a clear decision on this. Those in favour, please raise your hands. I've called a division. Councillor Benny, Murphy, Collett, Reid, Innes, Deeming, Cockerello, and myself. Those against? Councillors Cutforth, Peters, Cooper, Hulse. It is carried. It brings us to item 7.2, our capital projects, April 2021, page 84. Page 84. Councillor Hulse has moved the recommendation that the council notes that the project will be 10 months ending 30 April 2021. Councillors? Page 84.
Okay,
is there a seconder?
Yeah, second.
Councillor Cockerello.
So your worship, second meeting in a row, I'm going to congratulate the staff for this report and the work they've done, because it's taken a while to get here. I want to come back next month, and for the first time in about 10 years, our little red trend line is going to exceed expectations. Theoretically. And that would be an absolute first, and I was told that it's absolutely impossible to do. So if that little red line goes above that green little Manhattan graph there, I am going to celebrate. Some of the people around the room.
You're sure.
But that's why we collect rates. Ratepayers put the money into this organisation to see the work done, and if we keep up like that, the ratepayers got no cause of concern if we're actually spending it in the year we collect it. And that's what was my drive right from the start. So well done, and I hope that trend will really exceed itself so we actually cash at the top of that Manhattan bar next month.
Thank you, Councillor Hulse. Forward to the chocolate fish. May not happen. Simon, your reputation is on the line. Councillors, any further discussion on the capital projects report? Councillor Cockerello.
Madam Chair, the graph just so happened to be below Councillor Hulse's reference. We're referring to the percentage of year-to-date capital projects. In previous graphs, the stormwater was actually over 100%. Now it's not. Is there a reason?
Through the chair, this graph is an attempt to give some sort of representation across activities of vastly different scale. And the ones where there's a low budget compared to others, you get quite big distortions based on the timing of the budgets that the asset manager put into the plan, which may not be reality. So in the case of stormwater, there was a relatively small budget. All that was done at the start of the year well ahead of when they indicated the budget phase was going to be done. So it showed to be way ahead of target in the SA position. As the year's gone on, there's a slight shortfall there, so it's fallen behind. So with small budgets in relative terms, you get these quite big distortions.
So it's the moment in time of when we thought we would have spent X amount of dollars and we were a bit shy on one, spent more on others, but the aim is, of course, 100% at year end.
It probably better would be, from my point of view, it would probably make life easier if we had another line on there saying this is where we're expected to be for those different departments.
Through the Chair, that's what the 100% does. This is at this point in time, that's what the phasing said. If you refer back to the top of page 87, for the stormwater activity, that was at 1.1 million, it's actually done 769.
Some of them may have been affected by our school event. Any further discussion? Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7.3, building consent additional fee. We have a recommendation that the Council notes the addition to a fee to the 2021-22 fees and charges schedule following the introduction of the building consent management system.
Just to put order before you start.
Yes, Councillor.
We just adopted fees and charges in our draft long-term plan. So how's this going to impact on that?
You're absolutely right. We did adopt them, and this is a new fee, so to be able to include it as a fee to be charged in this ensuing financial year, we need to have a resolution here. So, Councillor Deming, you're moving the recommendation, and Councillor Innes is seconding. Councillor Deming.
Thank you. A logical move, we're going to just introduce a new process, is to sheet the cost to the person requiring the process. I think our customers and the industry have been asking for this for some time, and they will be hugely relieved to actually have the ability to have forms processed online. I note that this is based on the application being approved and refunded if it's not approved, which I think is an excellent move. So I totally support it. I think the charges for this additional process are quite reasonable. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Deming. Any further discussion? Councillor Cocker,
a question, Madam Chair. When is a property ever worth $5,000?
Oh, not the property value, right? The project value is what we're doing.
So the wording there.
Vehicle. Councillor Innes.
Just following on from Councillor Deming, it'll be a lot more efficient in time, and I think in doing that it will save considerable cost for those looking at building consent, so it's a logical move and it's good to see it in.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, so is this encouraging our homeowners and things so they can turn around and say we'd like to have a project value of $5,000 or up to $100,000, but we're not going to tell you it's actually more than $2,500?
You have to put it in building consent anyway.
What's the process for project value?
Through the Chair, that project value is assessed as part of the assessment, so if there's a big discrepancy there, that will identify as we go through. You can't really game a system like that.
Do remember that some homeowners are also ex-builders and some homeowners are also plumbers, where a lot of that cost can be consolidated in. So when they say the project's cost is worth $5,000, it might be actually only materials that they're paying for. So is this encouraging people to actually lie on their project cost?
I mean, not unless the project's more than $125,001, because it's the fees the same. Any further discussion? I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against?
Against.
Carried.
Order, please.
Councillors, that brings us to the end of the portion of our meeting. I do need somebody to resolve to this as confidential. Councillor Reid is moved. Sorry, Councillor Conquerilla moved. Councillor Reid seconding. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Just in time for our 2 hours sitting. So, councillors, I will adjourn the meeting for a period of 17 minutes. Reconvene at 11:15 for the confidential portion of our agenda. No, there is an item within this that is still valid. And we can cover that off. Thank you, councillors. Thanks to our teams and